So you are ready to file a CRBA, Consular Report of Birth Abroad, for your child that was born outside of the US, but you're not sure if you have the physical presence requirement. Let's talk about it, because I have gotten so many videos on my CRBA video about the physical presence. So I want to make sure that I answer the most pressing questions from that video. I am a U.S. immigration attorney, Lilian Chukwurah, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the U.S. immigration law system. Whatever it looks like, we work within that system to get our clients the result that they are looking for. The top question that I have been receiving on my CRBA video is, what documentation can I bring or use to prove my residency in the United States? This is so important because it is such a big part of the CRBA process. When you are applying for a consular report of birth abroad, you're basically saying that the day your child was born, they are a US citizen. You have to meet certain requirements in order to actually show that your child was automatically a citizen the day they were born, even though they were born outside of the US. This may require you to show 5 years of physical presence in the US, and for some people, that is difficult for them to wrap their heads around of the 5 years. Is it just 5 years of having a residence in the US, or 5 years of physical presence in the US? And I want to make something clear in this video. It is 5 years of physical presence in the US. You are physically in the US for 5 years, meaning you are counting the days that you were physically here. If you traveled outside of the US, those days that you were outside of the US do not count when you are counting your 5 years, okay? Super, super, super important, okay? So that's where you start. Figure out where your 5 years starts and ends. So when it comes to the physical presence requirement, you may have a 5-year physical presence requirement. So you want to basically calculate how many days you were actually in the US to get to your 5 years. Okay? How many days you were physically in the US to get to your 5 years. So if let's say your child is born in 2022, but before that, you had not left the US until your first trip in 2021 when you got your child's mother pregnant, right? If that's the case, those 5 years before you finally decided to leave the US and then ended up getting your child's mother pregnant, those 5 years count because you never left the US. But let's say you take a trip every single year, you cannot count those days that you were outside of the US. Unfortunately, you cannot. So you want to calculate how many days you are physically in the US. The easiest way to do this is if you have your passport that has all your stamps, or you have your flight information that shows when you left the US and when you came back. You can calculate those easily, okay? The people that have the biggest issue are people that don't keep records of their travel or have lost their old passport that has all the stamps. Those are the people that are going to have the biggest issue. But that physical presence must be met, okay? And you have to prove that physical presence. So we want to start with your 5 years, right? We want to start with which years, which days make up your 5 years. That's the first step. You want to start with that because you want to know where, what evidence you need based on when you need to prove that you were physically in the US. So start with knowing where your 5 years lie. Remember, the 5 years is physically in the US. It doesn't mean that you are in legal status in the US. It doesn't mean that you were a citizen in the US. And it does not mean that you were a green card holder in the US. It is just 5 years of physical presence in the US that you can prove. Okay? Physical presence in the US. That's all they're looking for. So I've had people ask me, okay, does the time that I was a green card holder count? Yes. Do you have to be a citizen for all those 5 years? No. Okay? You just need the 5 years. Now that you have you know what dates you need for that 5 years, go through each year, right? Did you file a tax return? Did you get a W-2? Those are really, really strong evidence of your physical presence. Okay. Did you pay property taxes? Did you pay for lease? Did you pay mortgage? Those are strong evidence of your physical presence, because while you're getting paid, again, that's different now. I will say this. You can be living in other countries and be working in the US. That's completely different now than it was years ago. Okay, I will say that. However, the natural way that we think about it is, why would you be getting paid by a US company if you were not physically present in the US, right? So that's how USCIS, that's how the embassy would look at those things. And then the W-2s, depending on how much you made, your hours, right? All those things will show, okay, this person was actually here, right? Your lease, why are you paying rent in an apartment that you don't live in? Why are you paying, right? Why are you paying property taxes for a house you don't live in? So those are things that are helpful. And then if you don't have those, let's say you're a student, right? You can show your school records, your transcripts showing, okay, you had these semesters that you were here going to school. All right. So those are the type of documentation. But before you start with the documentation, I really need you to calculate those 5 years. Okay. Because documentation goes with your 5 years. Calculate the 5 years, figure out, okay, I was here from January to June. So what document can I show for January to June? Oh, I paid rent from January to June. Oh, I was in school. I was taking classes from January to June. So I can use that. Okay. Oh, I had Facebook posts from when I was at this location on this date that was significant. And this is the proof. Oh, I ran the Boston Marathon. That shows you were physically here to run the Boston Marathon. So things like that is what you're looking for when it comes to physical presence. Again, you have to figure out what time frames that you're trying to cover, and then look at all the documentation that you have for those time frames. I have had clients where they had been in the US for over 10 years before the child was born, but they traveled so much and they didn't keep a lot of records. So we literally had to piece together, you know, 30 days here, 45 days here to get to that 5 years. So it's really important that you look at the big picture documents. And the big picture documents are your tax returns, your W-2s, your employment history, your school records. Those are the big picture things, right? Your lease, if you have a lease, that shows payments on your lease. And then those are the top to me. Those are the top. And then under that, you may look at your bank statements, right? Bank statements showing transactions in the US, super helpful, because if it says that you're buying, you bought something at a 7-Eleven in Worcester, Massachusetts, right? Clearly, you have to physically be here to buy something at a 7-Eleven in Worcester, Massachusetts. So that is a way that you can use your bank statements. And that's why bank statements are helpful in these situations, because it actually shows physical presence. Your lease on its own does not show physical presence. Your mortgage on its own does not show physical presence. Rent payments can show physical presence, right? Because maybe you made the transaction through your account, or you wrote a check, or whatever, however you made those payments. Those transactions can be useful to show physical presence, but showing that you have a lease on its own does not show physical presence, because you can sign a lease and still be outside of the US for a year, right? So it doesn't really make as much of a difference as people think it does. Okay, it's the payments that make the difference, all right? School records, again, top tier, all right? So your bank statements, that shows locations for each month where things were bought is really helpful. Something that just shows you have a bank account in the US is not going to help you at all to show physical presence, unless it's saying like on this particular day you were in the US and you opened a bank account. That's all it actually shows, is that on that day you were in the US and you opened a bank account, or on that day you were physically in the US and you requested a copy of your records. That's all it's going to tell the embassy. So you need to make sure that those bank statements actually show charges that are helpful to show your physical presence. Okay, if it's all online orders that you don't have to physically be in the US to do, you may have a harder time. But if it's like you swiped your card or things like that, that's going to be more helpful, because those typically have a location tag to them of the store where you made the transaction. All right, super important. Okay, don't just do general records. General records does not help anyone, because it may not show that you're physically in the US. Like a lease will not show you're physically in the US. Having, let's say, a car does not show that you're physically in the US. Now, if you have an East Pass account that shows every time you drove past an East Pass, right? Every time you drove past a toll, it makes a record of it. That's helpful. Having a car insurance, not helpful. But like I said, having the tolls, having the East Pass account where you can actually print out every single time you went through a toll in that month, that is helpful, right? If you have to drive through a toll place at least once a month, at least, once a week or something like that, super helpful. Super helpful, because it shows that you not only had that car, but you were driving that car, right? It's reasonable to assume that you were the one driving the car if it's just your name on the car. But just having a car in the US, paying the insurance on the car in the US doesn't really do much for you. Okay, so the key to the physical presence is that you show that you were here. The evidence has to show that you were here. So medical appointments are a great one, because for you to get, your teeth checked, for you to get medical records, you had to have been here to do the medical exams, right? Your doctor, unless it says specifically that it's telehealth, but for most testing that you have to be there in person. So for those purposes, you want to make sure that you have the records. Okay, that's really the key. If you have the records that show that you had, a dental procedure, that you had to go do your physical for the year, that you may have had a surgery, things like that, all helpful to show physical presence. Okay, showing that you had medical insurance doesn't show physical presence. Okay, so I want you to think about it in that way, right? Medical records showing that you went into a doctor's office and they did some medical testing, or they did X, Y, and Z, that's helpful physical presence evidence. Showing that you have health insurance is not helpful physical presence evidence. Okay, when I tell you that I have gotten those type of things to show physical presence, it is insane, but people are not sure what to include. Okay, so I want you to be as detailed as possible, right? Nothing general, not a lease, not I have a bank account, not I had insurance for my car, I had insurance for my health, I had dental insurance. Okay, those are all great for you, but it does nothing for your physical presence. So you want to make sure that you are having those documentations that show the thing that you're trying to show with those vague documents. So example, again, for the lease, instead of showing your lease, you'll show your rental payments, right? Instead of showing your car insurance, you may show tolls that you paid, right? If you got traffic tickets, You may want to use that as well. Okay. For your health insurance, instead of showing your health insurance, you can actually show medical records that show visits to your medical provider. Okay, so think about the general things and then the details. The details matter. So you want to focus on the details. Okay, I hope that is helpful, especially if you are going through your CRBA journey and you are confused on this physical presence, because this is where people usually get the most confused, is on the physical presence. Everything else is typically, you can get through it. For the physical presence, you need to remember that you need to count each day that you were physically in the US. If you traveled for a month, you will subtract that month. Okay, so you need to start there. Figure out where your 5 years lie, and then figure out what evidence you can use to show those 5 years. Okay, remember your passport stamps are important, right? It shows you're in and out. Your other records help to back up your physical presence that you are claiming. So again, super important that you are paying attention to detail and really thinking about your physical presence as a whole, and not just the 5 years prior to your child being born. It's 5 years physical presence in the US at any time over the age of 14. That's what I typically tell my clients. As long as you were 15, we can count it. Even if it was 30 years ago, we can count that as physical presence. Okay, so pay attention to that. You don't have to be a US citizen for that 5 years. You don't have to be a permanent resident for that 5 years. You just need to be physically present in the US. And of course, be a US citizen when the child is born. Okay, before the child is born, you were already a US citizen. So I hope that was helpful, and that gives you a better understanding of the physical presence requirement for the CRBA. If you are not sure where to start with a strategy session with me where we can discuss if you meet all the requirements, what documentation we may be able to put together for you, and how I can help you through that process. If you would like to schedule that free strategy session, please go ahead and go to my website, lilylegal.com, click on contact us so that you can pick a date and time that works best for you for us to talk.